So how can we make sure that we can clear these list items, that we can make these remove buttons here work? Well, back in our code here, we can simply go to these buttons and then add the hx delete attribute on that button. And that will then send a delete HTTP request whenever that button is clicked. Now, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, delete requests are standard HTTP requests, just like GET or POST requests. They're just using a different HTTP verb. Now, just by sending a delete request alone, you're not going to delete anything, though. It's instead the backend code you write that in the end decides what's going to happen. When you send a POST request, you also don't magically add data somewhere. Instead, you just decide to handle a POST request and you then write the code that controls what happens upon such a POST request. And it's the same now with a delete request. We can send a delete request, or we can get HTMX to send one by adding the hxDelete attribute on an element. And therefore, HTMX will send such a request whenever the most obvious event for an element occurs, which in case of a button is a click event. But we then have to decide to which path that request should be sent, and we then have to write the code on the backend to handle that incoming request and to then actually delete something. Now let's start with the path. Here, I guess it makes sense to again send this to /goals, but then I actually also want to incorporate the ID, or in this case here, the index of the element that should be deleted into this path here. Therefore, I'll actually adjust this string here to dynamically inject the index, so that the delete request is sent to /goals/0 for the first element in the list, /1 for the second element, and so on. And that of course now means that we need to add an appropriate route here in this Express demo application. And there we can set up a route for delete requests by using the delete method on this app object, and by then defining the path for which we want to listen to delete requests. And in my case here, that's /goals, and then this dynamic segment, which is 0 for the first element, 1 for the second element, and so on. And when using Express, that can be represented by using a colon and then any identifier of your choice, like for example IDX for index. This simply tells Express that this will be a dynamic segment which is not known in advance, but which we will be able to extract for every incoming request. So therefore here we have that request handler, and we can now get the index by accessing rec.params.idx. This is how we extract the actual concrete index that was submitted in that path as part of the incoming request. And I'm accessing .idx here because I have chosen IDX as an identifier after the colon here in this route path. So that then gives me the index of the item that should be deleted, and we can then therefore go ahead and access the course goals and then use the splice method, which is a standard array method in JavaScript, to remove an element from the array. And for that, we just need to pass the index of the element that should be removed to splice, and then a 1 thereafter as a second argument to make it clear that it's just this one element that should be removed. That will therefore then remove it from the list. And then what? How do we proceed here? Well, then, as a next step, we want to make sure that this list item is also removed here from that rendered list of goals. And that is something that's fairly easy to achieve with HTMX. Because if you're handling a delete request and you then want to make sure that the element or some element in the DOM that was responsible for sending the request is deleted, all you have to do is send back an empty response. So a response with an empty body. If you do that, HTMX will take that response content, which is empty, and it will then do what it always does with responses. It will render it into the element that triggered that request. So in this case, it would render it into this button. It would essentially delete this text here, remove, and replace it with the empty response. So with nothing. So we would have an empty button. That's of course not what I want here though. Therefore, what I'll do instead is I will add the hxTarget element and target the entire list item here so that the content of that list item is replaced with nothing and it's therefore essentially deleted. Now the CSS selector for targeting this list item here can be the ID of that list item. So therefore here I can use hashtag goal dash and then of course dynamically construct that ID by again using the index, which I am using for setting the ID as well. So with that I'm then targeting this entire list item. Now out of the box, as you learned, HTMX would then swap the content inside of that list item with the response body. So it would delete the content inside the list item in this case here, since the response body will be empty. But that's not exactly what I want here. Instead, I want to replace the entire element and therefore delete it. Hence, we should also set hxSwap here to outer HTML so that the entire list item is replaced with the response body, so with that empty body. And therefore, the entire list item will be deleted. Now, of course, we should add these same attributes down here, where I'm also rendering such list items. And of course, repeating it like this is not ideal, but for the moment, we'll do it like this. I will soon show you an alternative approach though. But for the moment, this is how we'll do it. Of course, down here though, I don't have the index variable. Instead, I calculated the index like this. And since I now need this in multiple places, I will, for convenience, create that index variable and store the result of this calculation, if you want to call it like this, in it, and then use index here and in those other places. With that, if we save that and we reload, if I enter learn HTMX, that's added. If I learn advanced concepts, that's added. And now if I click on learn advanced concepts, that is removed, as you see. And the same happens with learn HTMX. However, we'll face a problem here if we do it the other way around. If I now start by deleting learn HTMX and I then click learn advanced concepts, it looks like it worked, but if I reload, the advanced concepts are back. They weren't actually deleted, even though it looked like this on the UI. But it only looked like that because, of course, we always return this empty response, and therefore we always, in the end, delete the element that sent the request. But we didn't actually delete it here. And why is that? And how can we solve it?